The gentlelady is recognized for purpose of introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Ferrell to the committee today. He's a longtime public servant in the West, running several state-managed state wildlife agencies. He spent 30 years with the Arizona Game and Fish before finally seeing the error of his ways and coming to Wyoming. From 2008 to 2011, Steve Ferrell served as director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, where he addressed issues such as wolves, grizzly bears, sage grouse conservation, wildlife diseases, and invasive species. Steve now serves Wyoming's Governor Matt Mead as a lead policy advisor on wildlife and endangered species. I should note that Steve's son is a combat veteran who is still deployed as a civilian in Afghanistan today. Steve, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your long service. Thanks for your son's service, your entire family's sacrifices to our country. I look forward to your testimony today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Before I start, Governor Mead asked that I share with you his appreciation for the efforts of former Secretary Salazar and Fish and Wildlife Service Director for Dan Ash for their efforts in helping to delist wolves in Wyoming. Now to my testimony. States are unquestionably qualified to be partners in implementing the ESA. States have extensive expertise in science-based wildlife management principles and the application of public policy. Further, states are significantly affected by the ESA, including their ability to maintain their economies and their natural resources. To highlight our expertise, I'll describe two success stories in Wyoming. First, wolves. By the end of this year, the wolf population in Wyoming will have exceeded all recovery goals for 12 consecutive years. By anyone's standards, that should be a success story. Yet today, Wyoming remains involved in litigation contesting the delisting of wolves. Since delisting in Wyoming 9 months ago, 3 separate lawsuits have been filed from a total of 14 organizations. Litigation has been a constant occurrence regarding wolves since their first delisting in 2008. To achieve our most recent delisting, Wyoming revised its regulatory framework. Among other features, our plan commits to enhanced population goals, facilitates natural dispersal, improves certainty in protecting wolves, and commits to genetic connectivity. The latter feature is unique to Wyoming's plan. It includes extensive genetic monitoring and commits to further plan revisions if state management is not achieving its goal. Next, the Sage Grouse Task Force. Wyoming is a leader in sage grouse conservation. Since 2008, our core area strategy, established by 3 executive orders, has twice been endorsed by the service as a sound framework to avoid listing sage grouse. The task force is a product of a meeting co-chaired by Governor Mead and Secretary Salazar in 2011. It's comprised of governors' representatives of the 11 sage grouse states and the executives of 4 federal agencies. The task force is charged with developing a near-term management plan with a primary focus on policy. The task force represents a new model that is heralded by many as a unique approach to the conservation of a candidate species. The combined effort of the 11 states and 4 federal agencies is impressive. When leveraged back at home with the contributions of industries, NGOs, and landowners, the combined effort is staggering. Time will tell whether it will be successful. For state and private contributors, success will be measured by the attainment of its goal, a not warranted finding for sage grouse in 2015. States and industries need certainty that this model has a chance to succeed to invest so heavily in it. If this effort fails to achieve its goal, the sage grouse are listed in spite of the conservation taking place. I wonder if this model will be attempted again. In my written testimony, I offer ideas on how federal statutes and policies could be changed to improve the implementation of the ESA. I want to touch briefly on 2. One of the most urgent needs is to make the ESA decisions less susceptible to litigation. Changes to the ESA and the Equal Access to Justice Act that reduce the financial incentive to litigate would make the ESA implementation more efficient and transparent. In Wyoming, reduced incentives to litigate would have improved the effectiveness of implementing the ESA for wolves, grizzly bears, and others. Despite these amazing success stories, litigation continues with no finality. These subjects are repeatedly litigated and filed simultaneously in multiple jurisdictions, making them costly to defend. Legislation that requires wealthy litigants to pay their own way would help limit litigation to cases involving species in jeopardy and not ones where litigants merely disagree with the delisting decision. Lastly, climate change. Climate change is increasingly cited as a factor to list species using models to predict the effect of climate change on a species status. It is reasonable to expect that the accuracy of these models diminish the further into the future that they are applied. There are examples where species are proposed for listing only because of predictions made by climate change models. In these examples, the species is currently robust in number and distribution, and no other threats affect their status. This begs the question of how far into the future predictive models should be applied beyond the listing decision, and how much consideration should be given to current conditions in making those decisions now. Is it reasonable to remove a species from state trust status 10, 50, or even 100 years prior to it showing the predicted effect of climate change? Federal policy needs to define foreseeable future and develop criteria to consider the uncertainty of climate change models. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.